Washington still reaping the benefits of a big weekend.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today with just a reminder, by the way, right now our schedule is going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday while we're in the off season. So the best way to make sure you're up to date with everything we're doing over here on Locked On Huskies is to make sure you hit that subscribe button and click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. Lars, like I said, we're going to be talking about the May 30th recruiting weekend, which we've seen a couple of commitments roll in already, a couple of crystal balls we'll get to in a sec, but we want to talk about some of these big names as well. David Schwerzel, Vance Spafford, Arrington, maybe a little bit. We'll get into all those names and whether or not this weekend will be a success in terms of when we look back on this in December, depending on a couple of hypotheticals. We're going to throw out all the everydayers, but we'll get to those after we talk about a couple of crystal balls for three-star athlete Dre Pollard, three-star cornerback Derrick Johnson that rolled in over the weekend.
So neither one necessarily surprising to either of us, but I do think the Derrick Johnson one is more telling because I think we both thought, barring a surprise, Dre Pollard would be a take because you're looking at the other schools he's considering. Not that they're bad schools, but just you see like Washington would be one of the favorites, if not the favorite, going into this past weekend. Derrick Johnson was one where you had to make up some ground. Obviously, you offer right before he cuts his list to 6 in February, make it back in with the younger brother offer, and then get the official visit. And now you get the crystal ball. So that seems to be trending in a good direction for Washington. And anytime you can get a former legacy DB, 6'2", long, athletic, you take him. And I think that's one thing where we know John Richardson, anywhere he's been, Wyoming to Washington State and everywhere in between, if John Richardson thinks you can play, you can play. And so whether it's year 1, year 2, or year 3, in the case of, maybe Pollard might be a little bit more in terms of down the line when he kind of makes an impact, whereas Derrick Johnson with that size, maybe he pushes just a little bit earlier just with that length. I'm not saying either or there, but I think Derrick Johnson is the more telling one there.
So I agree with you there where I'm intrigued with Dre Pollard for a couple of reasons. But the first thing, when you talk about Derrick Johnson, it's something that you and I kind of talked about a little bit on air, a little bit off air, as that process kind of played out, where that's a guy you're a little bit more able to like get in late on because, his dad is his defensive coordinator. His dad, obviously, as you said, a legacy who was really successful over his time at Washington, ends up going on to get selected in the 6th round of the NFL draft. And that's all really cool where he already kind of understands everything about Washington, which is why you're able to make up that ground a little bit later on in the process. And to see it play out this way would be really cool. And you talk about John Richardson saying, hey, if I think that, if I offer you, you can play. It's not just that. He is such a perfect John Richardson corner. You talk about the athleticism, the ball skills that he has as well, how explosive he is when he just finishes his back pedal and just breaks on the ball. That's so much fun to watch. And I love seeing all that because it's something where we look at what this defensive backs class is starting to turn into, where you get the Gavin Day commitment. You already have a couple of really high-end 3-star prospects when you talk about Elijah Durr, CJ Lavender, and Kasani Giles. Adding Derrick Johnson to that is really, really fun because it doesn't preclude, a couple of these high-level takes that you're now going after. Brandon Arrington, Salesi Moa, Devon Benjamin even. We'll see how that recruitment ends up playing out over the next couple of weeks. You're going after all those big names, and having all of these other guys doesn't preclude any of that. But it also kind of leads into Dre Pollard, where you and I have talked about him a lot as a cornerback, but we kind of got to thinking, does he maybe become an offensive take for you?
I think, isn't he, correct me if I'm wrong, he's listed as an athlete.
He is.
Right. So the definition, I remember, the old NCAA, 14, college football 25, for the new age people, was anytime you had the athlete, it was, okay, how much of an athlete is he? Is he really, kind of a corner safety? Is he just one or the other? Or is he a guy who can play on both sides? And I think in the case of Dre Pollard, when you mentioned it, when it was Scotty Graham being, one of the primary guys recruiting him, like, you know what? That actually checks out. And it makes more sense when you think about the speed that he has, where you're looking at who do you pair with Anthony Sanoe? Well, you got the big bruiser in Sanoe. Dre Pollard would be that perfect kind of scat back where you call him a slot receiver, running back, whatever you want it, that Jordan Washington mold, if you will. You can make that work. And by the way, if down the line in a couple of years, if you want to flip him back to defense or the numbers work out more favorably on that side of the ball, you can do that then. And you have that discussion then. But it's the overall, you like the talent that he possesses on both sides of the ball. So you can take him as a take, figure it out down the line where, I mean, again, he's not Dylan Robinson. Let's be clear about that in terms of when Jedd Fisch is sipping the water at the signing day press conference saying, well, you might still play receiver. You never know. But I think in this case, it's more of a, you know what? We don't have that second running back. We could use another defensive back. We like the talent overall. Again, we have to say if, because again, as we record this on June 3rd here, again, check Twitter real quick because we did this before, But with that being said,
we're good for the time being.
Okay, good. So Dre Pollard is not committed to Washington, as I said, but if Dre Pollard happens to commit to Washington, either one of those routes, you're more than fine taking.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing where, we talk about some of these guys that have been taken as true athletes over the last couple of seasons. Donovan Robinson falls into this boat perfectly. You can say the same about Rashawn Clark, who was listed as an athlete for a long time on this roster. And it's just one of those things where if you like the pure talent, you can figure it out later. And that's okay. And, usually we're talking about this with guys like a Salesi Moa, like a Dylan Robinson, as you said, but people just kind of get lost in, the star ranking sometimes of, he's a lower ranked 3-star, but this is a guy who was the 100, 200, and 400 meters state champion in Nevada on the track. And that's something where, hey, that speed's going to play. And if it happens to be at running back, it's one thing where you and I have talked about, hey, maybe that pendulum is starting to swing back toward UCLA for Brian Bonner and the early playing time he's going to be able to get there at that position. So if you like what's going on at, just with his film at running back, you can find a way to make it work there. And I don't disagree with that, where you go and you turn on the tape. He's got that just really fun extra gear that he clicks it into sometimes, where one of my favorite plays, I feel like I've mentioned this before on the show, as the ever dares know, is there was one play where he's got 3 defenders around him after he breaks through on a run and is 10, 12 yards upfield. And all of a sudden he just clicks into an extra gear that none of those defenders have. And he's 5, 10 yards further down the field than everybody else. And that's something that we know Scotty Graham loves to see from his running backs, where when you turn on Jordan Washington film, Quade Carr film, it's the exact same thing. And so if that ends up being the take, again, it makes it a little bit easier on you as you try to overhaul the secondary in the same way that you did at wide receiver last year, if you want to end up taking 5, 6, 7 guys. Because let's be honest about this. If Brandon Arrington, and this is just a hypothetical here, but if Brandon Arrington, Salesi Moa, and Devon Benjamin all say, hey, we want to commit to you, you're not turning that down, but you also really like Dre Pollard, so this is your way to try to make all those things work.
And one thing, as you were saying, all great points there, so I'm not refuting anything, but building off of that, one thing that kind of stood out to me was, as a guy who developed, not necessarily a true project, but a guy that you project down the line, scream special teams, a guy that you can put back either punt, kick returner, you can put him as a gunner, do whatever. Having the dedicated 2 special teams, because that's what drew my mind to is that's why you go and hire 2 special teams coordinators. So you can say, hey, you know what? We like Jedd John Richardson, Ryan Walter, Scotty, all say, hey, we like this talent. We just don't know what to do with him for about 18 months. Chris Pacioli, here you go. And I think that's a great problem to be in, because one of the, more successful routes the guys find in the NFL is building on special teams. And so I think wherever he happens to end up in, let's call it year 3, so it'd be 2027, 28, whatever that season ends up being, whatever. The point being, exactly. But the point being that you can still give him opportunities on special teams in various ways to find out, are you better as a runner? Are you better as a defender? There's different ways you can use that special teams angle. And I think that's just kind of all speaking to take the talent, you sort it out later.
Now, Lars, the big question is, will David Schwerzel, Vance Spafford, Daniel Odom, are any of those guys going to join up as well? We'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big, which is great news. If you want to go check out this over-under on the Washington Huskies win total this season, it's set at 7.5 right now, and I think that's an easy over. I look at some of these road games that Washington has to go to. Michigan, Wisconsin, that's going to be a little tough. I don't know how I feel about Maryland yet this season. You got to go to Wazoo, and you also have to go to UCLA. I like the way this schedule is shaping up for Washington, and with DeMond Williams at the helm, I'm betting on the Huskies this year. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Lars, let's start with David Schwerzel, because he's got his commitment date set for June 19th after a pair of official visits to Stanford and UCLA. Feels like a good sign that he's canceled Cal, canceled Michigan State. So he's down to these three. And he's got a 247 Sports crystal ball to Washington. And if you go and you read some of the comments, it feels like he's taking these visits a little bit as a formality, where one of the quotes, I believe was our buddy Scott Eklund who had it, was his mom deserves these visits to just get a chance to see everything her son has accomplished, which is wonderful. And one of the things that you and I really love about the recruiting process is seeing these kids be able to go out and, experience these things and just truly what they've earned from all these years of hard work. But I feel like Washington is still just heavily in the driver's seat.
Yeah, anytime you can have a chance to legitimately attend Stanford, you take that visit. I don't care if you're leading 99.9% to Washington. You really take that. Also Stanford, I think, who's the coach now at Stanford? I know Andrew's the GM. Andrew Luck's the GM.
I'm totally blanking on that.
Frank Reich, yeah. But it's like a 1 year. So again, you could understand why he wouldn't go to Stanford, but again, you understand why you still see the process through, because you don't know what's going to happen. Same thing with Wasi, where it's like, hey, I end up going to Stanford, think it's a better fit. Now I can come back to Washington potentially. Same kind of concept there. But for David Schwerzel, to me, it's we've always kind of wondered the amount of times he's been on campuses. Between him and Derrick Coleman-Brucer, who's been on campus more, you think?
I think it's Derrick Coleman-Brucer, but it's very, very close.
It's a lot closer than people would think. And I think that's the key there, is I think you would think, okay, well, he keeps coming, but he hasn't committed yet. I think you hit the nail on the head with formality. I think once you get through those visits, obviously the June 19th date especially, it's like, wait, like that usually June 20th weekend is like a major visit weekend. So actually you're not waiting until after that. Tells me your mind's pretty much already made up. I think you said UCLA is the other one. Why not? You take a visit there, I guess, UCLA, Akaika, Westwood, all that. Southern California in June, nobody can hate on that. So, and you especially.
Too hot, man.
Well, okay, go off. But with that being said, I think when you look at David Schwerzel, I think when he ends up, not really a bold prediction here, but I'm just going to say when he ends up committing to Washington, in my opinion. I don't know tea leaves, just reading the tea leaves there. That I think might start kind of, building that, momentum from this weekend, because again, the longer these guys stay uncommitted, it's like, well, he's not in the boat yet. Like, are they really leading for him? It's like we talked about, when the crystal balls start rolling in, kind of see where this is going.
So I'm glad you one of the things you mentioned there is all the visits he's taken to Washington, because I want to just kind of spin this conversation in a different direction and talk about Vance Spafford. Because this is something where this is his, third, fourth time on campus, and being able to just have all those different visits where you and I fully believe that he is going to end up somewhere other than Georgia when he signs in December. I already went on record last week, made my bold prediction that I think it's going to be Washington. It sounds like whatever his decision is going to be is not going to be final until after he makes his Miami visit. And so I'm curious to see what this is going to look like, because I just think he's such a good fit for this offense that I think Washington did a really good job of selling him over the weekend on what this is going to be moving forward. But I can't help but sit back and think that it would be obviously be better for Washington if he pulled the trigger sooner. But I kind of have to say I'm a little worried about where Miami might be able to sit with him in terms of not only what they're able to offer, but just kind of that allure, which, for a long time has helped them win battles. I mean, you and I have made our opinions on Mario Cristobal very, very clear at this point in time. But I kind of look at it and I think there's a little room for concern there But as of right now, I still feel pretty good about him winding up with Washington at the end of the day.
All right, I'm glad you phrased it that way, because if this was an offensive line recruit, I would be concerned about Miami.
Sure.
If this was a transfer recruit, I would be concerned about Miami. We're talking about a high school West Coast kid going all the way to Coral Gables, Florida, and you're already committed to Georgia. Like, you're going further east, and Kirby Smart's not good enough, and you want to play for Mario Cristobal. Again, you can have your opinion about Mario, whatever it is. Like, if I'm choosing between Mario and Kirby Smart is every day and twice on Sunday. Like, it's not a question. So when you, it's really, I think, between Georgia and Washington. Does he stick with Georgia? Does he end up at Washington? Miami, I think, is in the race. I do, but to me, it's like, that one doesn't make sense to me. It's not like, correct me if I'm wrong here, Mission Viejo doesn't have a quarterback committed to Miami in the 26th class. I don't see a ton of connection there. Now, again, I could be wrong. Watch, we record this on July 3rd, and he's committed to Miami. No,
not that far in the future.
No, but I'm saying, like, we look above and he happens to be committed to Miami. Okay, but again, we now run back the other argument of wait until December. Maybe, and Miami comes in with an extra bag in July, but the win-loss record is in Washington's favor in December, and I think Vance is a pretty smart kid. He's going to see the end of the day, and maybe I should sign with Washington a la Marcus Harris. But I just think I would be surprised. I'm with you. Again, like, my bold prediction was, you get your entire receivers class from this past weekend. So talking about, thinking Vance Spafford is going to be a part of that, I absolutely agree. And I think it's kind of that similar conversation as far as where once it happens, then the Brandon Arrington conversation gets easier. Then these other conversations start happening. Then Madden Williams, you kind of just go down the list. Daniel Odom, like, do you build off of these other clips? Once that first domino happens, and you would think, like, well, what about Gavin Day? What about Dominic Harris? Well, two Nevada guys don't really have an impact when it comes to a Georgia commit and a Texas A&M commit and, that type of offensive firepower, especially with the guys being on defense. But you look at it and think, once those start to happen, I think more dominoes from that May 30th weekend will start to fall.
I think that's a really fair point, because when we look at some of these other big-time visitors, Daniel Odom and Madden Williams are a really intriguing pair of prospects as wide receivers, where they're very similar players at St. John Bosco, where they're both big, athletic playmakers who do a lot of damage after the catch with the ball in their hands. And it's a lot of fun to watch where, just in terms of when you turn on their film, it's, okay, I can see one of or both these guys fitting in a Jedd Fisch offense in that outside receiver role that we saw Denzel Boston play really well this year. And I'm curious to see what this is going to look like. I feel like you can end up with one of them is my opinion on the matter, because I like where Washington sits with Mason James. That's something we're going to continue to discuss on this channel. But I look at both of these receivers, and I think Washington is a really great opportunity to prioritize and close on one of them. I feel like you could take both if you wanted to. My thought is, after taking 5 receivers last year, the spots are going to be somewhat limited, and especially with a guy we want to discuss a little bit more later on in Salesi Moa, you kind of want to make sure you still haven't, you want to show him that there's an opportunity to get on the field early and often on both sides of the ball. So on offense, it's kind of, do we prioritize both of those guys, or do we take Salesi Moa at the end of the day? I think that, it's very clear which way Washington would end up leaning if that were to be the case. But I look at Daniel Odom in particular. And you mentioned Marcus Harris. He ends up decommitting from Oklahoma, signing with Washington in December of last year. We've kind of seen what's going on with Mason James, where there's starting to be some rumors flying around that it might be down to Washington and Mizzou, which would be really, really interesting. So if you're able to get him as well, that's a really nice win for you, especially, going into Oklahoma, where it's something you and I have said, where you don't turn down a 4-star talent from that area of the country where you don't normally win recruiting battles, which just makes it harder to have to say, hey, do you take one or do you take the other? I'm in the boat of, if it comes down to that, again, you should probably end up prioritizing Daniel Odom, just in terms of, in my opinion, the fit in the offense. But there are so many moving parts here that I feel like Washington's coaching staff hasn't decided which one to go all in on, which is why it's fun. You can take both those guys in on a visit on the same weekend and just kind of let everything sort itself out over the next couple of weeks.
So, perfect way to phrase this and bring it back to the name that you put in the second segment, David Schwerzel. O'Day teammates with FSCLA. So, You're looking at 2 defensive linemen. You could pull both from the same school. And I think the interesting thing about them is like you bring them in on 2 different weekends, but you're still hoping to get both of them. I think the fact that they brought in both Bosco guys with Derek Zammit, I think just kind of tells you that 85 numbers, again, getting less and less firm by the day, which, by the way, I'm okay with that. I understood Jedd's principle in terms of, hey, we don't need to go to 95, 105, 100, there's no need to get ridiculous with it. But if it's 85 plus Brendan Arrington plus both Bosco kids plus, you make those exceptions because you're looking at thinking, well, maybe in 18, 24 months from now, we're back down to 85 because we've, guys have transitioned out and things like that. And the competition and the cream rises to the top. So you're willing to lose that for 1 or 2 years, knowing it's not going to be a permanent thing. And also between 8, as long as you keep it under 90, I think that's the number Jedd's really focused on.
No, I think that's a really fair point. But Lars, we're going to flip the script on this discussion and throw a couple hypotheticals at the everydayers of if none of these 4 stars choose Washington, is this weekend still a success? Okay, let's lay out this hypothetical. Everybody who has committed to Washington so far signs with the Huskies, plus Dre Pollard, plus Derrick Johnson, plus let's throw David Schwerzel into this boat because he's got that crystal ball to Washington as well. So I want to be fair there. But that leaves Brandon Arrington going elsewhere, plus the 3 receivers who are committed to Georgia, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M. Let's say none of those guys sign with Washington. Do you still consider this recruiting weekend to be a success?
No, but there's a catch. No pun intended. It's who replaces them, because you have to say it's no, because if you whiff on, again, not necessarily Brendan Arrington, but the receivers is the real key there. Where Mason James came up twice, at least twice. Vance Spafford came up at least twice. Madden, I believe, came up at least twice, and Daniel Odom came up at least once, at least twice. I'm not sure about the third visit, but I know for a fact they've come up for at least multiple official and unofficial visits. So you'd think if you whiff on all of those guys. And then I guess the only one that you wouldn't theoretically whip on would be Mason James because he's coming in on June 6th. But that to me is like, okay, that's a loss, but how do you fix that loss? Because the staff is not just going to sit there on their hands and say, oh, we lost all 3 receivers. Kevin Cummings, I guess I'll focus on 2027. Is it Salesi Moa plus 1? Like we talked about before the show, you threw it out perfectly, which is what if you get Mason James and Salesi Moa? Then the answer is like, okay, then the answer is yes. But if you are strictly saying, like you laid out, you don't get any of those guys, is it a success? It's not. But the catch is, how do you fix that? Although I don't think that scenario is going to hold out either way.
So I like where you're going with that, because that's one of the things, that's why I wanted to talk about early playing time with Salesi Moa, where this is a kind of kid where, let's be real, Washington's not the favorite. That still seems like it is Utah, but the Huskies have done a really great job making up ground there. And I think it's one of those things where, I feel like a lot of people would be happy where it's, hey, we're saving a spot for that guy. And, maybe we'll try to, work out plan B options if this one doesn't go through, because of just what kind of a unique talent he is on both sides of the ball, where this is one of those rare occasions where we're not making any decisions on that scholarship spot until this guy makes a decision. I feel like there aren't a lot of players in any class you could ever say that about. And the fact that Washington has gotten into the mix for Salesi Moa, A, says a lot, but B, I think he falls into that category of, we're not going to, pull a trigger on one decision or another until we know what this kid wants to do. And that could end up biting you, because it is a big risk where, again, under this circumstance of Spafford, let's just say he goes to Miami, and Daniel Odom and Madden Williams stay firm with where they are now. Let's just say that's how it ends up. You're not going to be happy with that. We're getting Mason James is still a big win for sure, but you would have to find a way to pivot and get one more receiver. And to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier, maybe this is a situation where you say, hey, Dre Pollard, we know you played receiver in high school. Let's give you a shot out there, and we can, search for a running back here or there. I still like down from Oregon where, hey, maybe you can throw a late offer there and try to get into the mix the same way you've done with Sam Violetall, the same way you did with Gavin Day. Like, there are certain ways to make this conversation work and work out these numbers, but it's a curious situation to think about, because you and I really love that Washington has taken these big risks, but it's a matter of, and I really do believe there is a plan here that, maybe hasn't revealed itself yet if this were to come to fruition, but there is a plan C, D, and E in case these things happen.
Well, I think we've even seen one of those, speaking of curious, like Denarius Gray is the one where you talk about, and the reason why I throw his name out there is when you mentioned Dre Pollard, a receiver, it's like, well, Dre, we're thinking about that X receiver, that XZ outside receiver, that big body, that Denzel Boston. No offense to Dre Pollard, but that's not the first thing that comes to mind when I think Dre Pollard.
Fair. No, that's fair.
But in terms of as a take, maybe if you take two slot guys, him, Mason James, and one of Denarius Gray, Salesi Moa, whoever that big body guy is outside. But I think what we've seen from the staff and Kevin Cummings is Jedd Fisch's offense and Kevin Cummings as a recruiter. If you're a 4-star receiver and it's like mid to late November and you're unsure of something and your commitment or wherever your status is, Washington may be a school for you, and Jedd Fisch may be a coach for you, because I think it just always screams like there's always going to be a way to find a receiver. I think even Jedd said it at Arizona, year 1 or year 2, during his signing day press conference down there, when he's like, look, anytime you can go get a receiver, like there's just certain positions where like, hey, you can never have a shortage of good receiver. So I think, in that case, is it, the reason why I bring up Denarius Gray though in that mold is it's like you brought him up for an official visit. He is committed still, I believe, to Auburn technically, right, as we record, technically committed, same way Vance Spafford is committed to Georgia. Where how firm is that commitment? Well, Denarius Gray has since taken at least one other official visit since his visit to Washington. So to me, I that's one where maybe that's your plan C, where you brought him in early. Ideally, you probably want the Bosco guys above him, but you kind of put that, situation in place where, hey, if we don't get this guy, we can already circle back and say, hey, we already brought you in for an official. Like, we can make this happen whenever. It's just a matter of, is that the route you want to go? Because again, the further, as much as I love expanding in the new territory, getting a Mason James, getting a Kasani Giles, even though he's from California, going back to IMG and those type of things, that's an equally big risk, because the further away you go, those other schools, the in-state Florida schools, the Alabamas, the Georgias, even UNC, God forbid, whoever the coach ends up being.
Hey, I was going to say LSU, since that's just
that is.
I didn't want to go down that road.
I was going to say that deal is choice in terms of, do you want to go down the LSU road or Brian Kelly, or do you want to go Bill Belichick, UNC? Pick a road. But there's no good road there. But with that being said, respectfully, Bill, obviously respectfully. With that being said, you just look at that situation and it seems like, okay, he might end up somewhere else. So Washington, that could be your plan C, D, E in that respect, because whatever that plan is, it's not going to be a lesser talent. It's going to be the same crop of elite talent. But what pairing, how it ends up working out, that's just kind of the puzzle that Jedd Fisch is going to figure out.
Right, and one of the reasons we wanted to throw out just some of these different situations is because this class is shaping up really nicely. From everything I know I've heard, and I'm sure you have as well, from just what's going on behind the scenes, is we don't think this is going to come to fruition. Let's be very clear about that. It feels like Washington will get at least one of these guys, plus maybe a Mason James, plus maybe one other pass catcher of some kind. We'll see what happens at tight end as well. But as I just continue to look at this class, it's been really impressive to watch just what this coaching staff has been able to do from year 1 to year 2. And even though, this team did go 6-7 last year, Washington has done such a great job and Brandon Arrington is, obviously the prime example of this now, right? But you've done such a good job to put yourself in the mix for these high value recruits that can continue to elevate your program, because it's something, we see all the time of, oh, well, why don't you just go get this mid-tier 3-star, which is great because you're still doing that. You're still finding ways to go, win these battles for the high upside 3-star athletes that you really like. Sam Viladol, name I mentioned a few minutes ago, is one that I'm really curious about. Kai Wesley, the other tight end that I think Washington ends up taking from Utah, is another one. Ramzak Fruin, a linebacker from Bethel High School here in Seattle, shout out to Spanaway, Tacoma, that whole area. But I look at all those guys and you can still go out there and build your class with high upside athletes like that. But to consistently compete with the Ohio States, the Georgias, the LSUs, the Michigans, those types of programs, you need to make sure you're continuing to level up the high-end prospects that you want to bring into this program on a year in, year out basis. And the fact that this coaching staff has, even after a sub 500 season, has been able to go out there and sell that and say, this is the direction that we believe this program is going in, and we think that you are going to help take it to the next level, is very impressive to see.
I agree. And I think the one thing to also consider when we talk about this high-end talent, because there was a couple of names that I was also kind of circling through that we had on the board before they made their commitments. Sinai Thomas from Reardon, Archbishop Reardon going to Oregon State, Rico Blessingen going to Minnesota. The guys that Washington was in on earlier on actually in the process, but made their decisions elsewhere. Just some other names, but those reasons why I throw those guys out, both 3 stars. But I think much like we talked about with the staff just in general, if they believed early on that they can evaluate and that those guys were on the board early, makes me think like there's nothing that fell off in their game. And so even though they're committed to the Oregon States and Minnesotas, they're not the Ohio States and LSUs. You have coaching that can outcoach the LSUs, potentially outcoach some of the, not necessarily Ohio State, because we haven't seen that. We'll see that potentially in September. But you just look and think you can trust the evaluation where even if it's not that 4-star, the guys that they do end up bringing in, whoever it may end up being, the staff is firmly confident in their ability to trust and develop their abilities.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of your viewers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.